for those of you who may not be aware, Andy Thomson is a psychiatrist and also the author of a book that has been published recently, which I did have to hand. Oh yeah, I put them over here. It is this book, which I strongly recommend people read. It is called, oh, there's such a lag on the, Why People Believe in God or Gods. It is available from the Richard Dawkins site, and it basically explains the sort of like psychology of why people believe in religion, or why they have a propensity to believe in religion. We also have Dr. Lone Frank, who has also recently published a book. This is her book, My Beautiful Genome, which deals with, well, I'll probably let her explain, but the one thing I will say about this book, it is one of the items that is available on the eBay auction, and it is signed by the author. So,
it is going to become a collector's item very soon.
Absolutely, a first edition signed copy. Andy, I'd like to begin with you. I find your book really interesting, and I think the thing that really got me thinking is that a lot of people understand evolution or accept evolution to a degree in so far as it sort of like affects physical attributes, but often they don't seem to appreciate that the mind developed under the same evolutionary process and under the same evolutionary forces as the body did. And the gist of your book, if I'm correct, is that, you know, if you look at the way in which the mind evolved, it gives explanations and an understanding as to why people may believe in religion. I hope that's a fair summary, but could you expand on that? And if I am wrong, correct me. Why is it that the process of evolution of the mind has left us with this propensity for religion?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on today's program, and a program that is supporting Doctors Without Borders. Thank you very much for the compliments about the book, and to Dr. Frank, whom I met. Congratulations on your book. Nice to talk to you again.
Yes, you too.
To respond to your question, Richard, evolution is the only workable explanation we have for the design and variety of all life on Earth. And increasingly, I think people are coming around to that, hopefully. But I think few people don't really understand that evolution is the only workable explanation we have for the architecture of the human mind. And in that architecture are mechanisms which originally evolved for other purposes, but which make us vulnerable to generate religious belief. And I think a simple way of illustrating it is junk food. That all of us evolved appetites that were in harsh, dangerous environments. We have appetites, we have cravings for sweets, but the original sweet was ripe fruit. We have cravings for fat, but that original fat was lean game meat. Modern culture creates something that arises from those adaptations, but comes back at us in supernormal stimuli. Instead of a ripe fruit, we get Coca-Cola, brownies, cookies. Instead of lean game meat, we get fat hamburgers. And so religion is a cultural construct that arises from these adaptations, these parts of our mind, but it comes back at us with supernormal stimuli. One of the most obvious is the attachment system, the system we have for caretaking. And we experience it with our children, with our parents, but then religion gives us supernormal parents, parents with greater power than ordinary parents. And I think that's a brief way of looking at it.
Sorry, I muted my microphone. I'm sorry. One of the many analogies that you used, or examples that you used, related to children, and the idea, for example, that I think you said 50% of 4-year-olds have imaginary friends that they talk to, and up to the age of 9, children have this idea that there is a purpose behind, for example, lakes. If they're asked why are there lakes, it's for ducks to sit in and so on. And I thought also very interesting the example that you gave about the crocodile eating the mouse. Do you just want to expand on that a little?
Certainly. Again, as children, we start to practice the things we will use as an adult. And some of the mechanisms are more clearly seen in children. But we're all of us as adults are children grown up, and we use those mechanisms too for everyday social interaction. And those mechanisms, again, get pirated or used by religion. And a child's imaginary friend is an extreme example of something that all of us do, which is we imagine conversations with unseen others. I've been thinking about the conversation I was to have with you all today. So I can have a complex social interaction with an unseen other. It's crucial for memory, for planning. Well, it's just one small step to an interaction with an unseen ancestor or God. Similarly, children overread purpose in ways that we think is cute. You know, what are rivers for fish to swim in? Mm-hmm. But we still overread purpose. If you listen to any of us describe natural selection, we really tend to subscribe natural selection as if it's an intentional agent. It's very hard for us to really describe it or even think about it in its purposeless dimension. Now, the work you described about the alligator and the mouse, that's lovely work by Jesse Bering, an evolutionary psychologist, and I would highly recommend his book, The Belief Instinct, to anyone interested in the psychology of religion. And he's done some, I think, brilliant research teasing out how our minds make a distinction between physicality and mental life. And his experiment was with children. There was an alligator puppet and a mouse puppet, and he tells the children it's just a game, and the alligator eats the mouse. And then he questions the children, does the mouse still drink water? Child says no. Does the mouse still eat grass? No. Does the mouse still miss its mother? Yes. Is the mouse still angry at his brother? Yes. So he shows how this notion of mental life is separate from the body persists, and you can see in his work, it's very easy to start thinking about souls, it's just one small step.
I think the word you used in the book was disembodiment, and this idea that the mind can be separate from the body.
Yes, and the idea here is that religion pirates or hijacks systems that are already present that we use every day. And that what Bering shows, and what some others I think have shown nicely, is that the sense of a form of life separate from the body is just part of the default setting of all of our minds.
Andy, I'm going to pause you there. I'm going to come back to you in a second, but I feel as if I'm neglecting Dr. Frank. And as I say, I don't think I gave her a suitable introduction. Dr. Frank has a history in neuroscience, a PhD. She is an author and very well-respected journalist based in Copenhagen, working for a top publication there. And I think probably when her biography is written, The highlight of her career is probably going to be her appearance on the Magic Sandwich Show in Dublin.
I have no doubts.
But Dr. Frank, I did mention your book, My Beautiful Genome. I didn't explain it very well. Perhaps you'd like to give a shout out for this book. And also, as I say, a signed copy is available on eBay. I'll come back to that in a moment. Dr. Frank, tell us about your book.
Right. As you said, it's called My Beautiful Genome. And it is about personal genomics, which I see as sort of a momentous development that's happening in science and technology right now. What is happening is really that we're seeing biology's parallel to the PC revolution in computers. Whereas computers used to be big mainframes that were only for experts, big companies, university institutions. Suddenly the prices dropped and we had personal computers, and now computers are everywhere. They've changed our society, they've changed the way we interact. And I think genetics is going through the same thing. Genetics used to be solely for, experts, geneticists. It happened in universities. It had nothing to do with you or I or, the ordinary consumer would not have his or her hands on genetic information ever. It wasn't even thinkable. And now, because the prices of sequencing have dropped tremendously, we're seeing that we're having personal genomics. We can suddenly, as consumers, go out there, get ourselves all sorts of genetic tests. Soon we can have our full genome, and we're talking about 6 billion base pairs. We can have them sequenced and mapped and explained to us for, $1,000 perhaps. And so what I do in the book is that I do a personal take on personal genomics. So I use myself as the guinea pig. I go out there, I get the various consumer genetic tests. I speak to the various, researchers behind them, the CEOs of the companies, and I enroll myself in university studies of personality and genetics and so on. So I try to speculate, what is going to happen in the future with this technology? How is it going to change the way we, look at ourselves, interact, so on and so forth. So in short, a personal take on personal genomics. And it's a fun read.
It is. I wish I had read more of it, but before the show, I will carry on reading it. But I just wanted to give one shout out for it because one of the people that has commented on it is Michael Shermer, and if you're not aware, Michael Shermer will be on the show, about 20 hours time or something.
I know.
His comment was, before I read My Beautiful Genome, I could not decide if I would ever get my genome analysed, but now I'm sending in my SPIT ASAP. Lone Frank is one of the surest science writers I've ever read. She not only explains with great clarity the technical twists and turns of the science behind unravelling the double helix, she does so in such a page-turning, controversial style that once I got started, I could not stop. Read this book. Your genetic future may depend on it. Now, there are a couple of things there, and there's another passage that I'm going to read in a second, but the one thing that was sort of like working through my mind as I was reading it, and, the ability of our genome to be analysed and for characteristics to be determined, is that I suspect what would you have to say about that?
Well, I have absolutely no doubt that there's going to be eugenics. There is already eugenics. Actually, I speak to a British scientist, a geneticist in the book, and he's talking about neo-eugenics. So when you say eugenics, everybody is thinking, oh God, Second World War, a state goes in and, sterilizes people and basically this, decides who is good enough to breed and who is not, who's good enough to exist and not. And when you think about eugenics as it happens today, it is basically that people, consumers again, mothers and fathers to be, are deciding which embryos they find qualified to live. So it happens already. We see abortions for, deformities, serious disabilities, diseases, and so on. And have no doubt that the more we know about genetics, the more we are going to see a tendency towards to try to choose, the best possible embryo you can have, the best possible child.
I can see that. And one of the, for example, let's take an issue, maybe not a health issue as, determining whether the child may be diabetic or not, but an issue such as homosexuality, and you have, bigoted, homophobic people who have their embryo tested, and it seems as if there's going to be a high propensity that this child may be homosexual. The idea that people would then abort it as a result of that's the sort of issue that I sort of like think in that regard.
I mean, what would trouble me there is also the attitude behind it. Why would you want to abort a child that, and let me say, there's nothing that points to homosexuality being exclusively genetic. We know it's not. There are genes involved, probably many genes, and then there are environmental factors. Okay.
This is the section that I wanted to refer to. It reads as follows: "It is known that hereditary is involved not only in our temperament and mood, but in complex matters such as religiosity and political attitudes." What I thought would be interesting is if you see from one side, Andy is approaching it from a psychological point of view. You're saying that religiosity is also sort of like genetic, has a genetic aspect to it. We are obviously closer to understanding why people may be religious, but where does that get us? Where do we go from here? I'm going to leave that open to you two.
Well, if I start off, I mean, I really don't think that you probably hope that I would say, it's going to make us all realize that religion is of course, it's just not, it's all bogus. So, let's leave it and nobody will be religious in the future. And I just don't think that's going to happen. Because
I have to say, I'm terribly sorry to interrupt you, but I have to say, having read Andy's book, I think that his arguments for our propensity to be religious are so strong that I do not have that optimism at all. I think we are doomed for people to have a propensity to religion.
Well, yeah, I think you're right. I mean, religion is not going to go away. But I also think that it is sort of, as some people have called it, a cognitive parasite. It's sort of, it preys on our mental apparatus. But it is also a parasite that mutates. So you could say religion evolves, just as, there's social evolution, cultural evolution, there's, evolution of religion. And I think that the future of religion is hopefully what we see in, say, the Nordic countries and, many European countries, that religion is becoming more and more of a sort of, it's a private matter. It's not dogmatic as it used to be. It's not fundamentalist. It's more about your own well-being in a way. It's almost like it becomes wellness and psychology. I am religious, or it's good to be religious because if you have faith, you live longer and your blood pressure is not quite as high. You see those studies over and over. And I think that will be probably the way religion will be evolving. I hope.
Andy, do you share that optimism? Because it seemed to me that although your book was very interesting, it did leave me with this sort of like pessimism that we're never ever going to get rid of religion because it's so imbued within us.
Well, I'm sorry it left you with that view. Before I go any further, let me add to the introduction of Dr. Frank, because I think listeners also might be interested. She has a book that I think is underappreciated called Minefield, How Brain Science is Changing Our World. It was a 2009 publication, and she has an excellent chapter in there on the cognitive neuroscience of religion. And she has, I think, absolutely the best description of Michael Persinger's God helmet that you will find, even in a sense better than some of Dr. Persinger's. And so I would recommend that book also.
Thank you.
No, I want listeners to take a look at it. Back to your question, Richard. I'm hoping that religion will become like smoking, something that was widespread, that increasingly people realize is bad for their health, and it will diminish. And I think I share Dr. Frank's view or hope that it will mutate and it will become less toxic. But
yeah,
and I think one of the Sam Harris has a nice point, and he talks about how if we were sitting around in 1850 in the United States, and somebody said slavery would be gone in 20 years, nobody would believe them. It would be dismissed. The idea was that slavery, if it went away, would take a long time to go. And of course, within 20 years, it was gone. And there's a part of me that remains optimistic that if this cognitive neuroscience of religion, and the basic mechanisms I think are easy to understand. If you understand the psychology of the junk food meal, you understand religion. I think if this is in basic psychology textbooks, if it's part of your basic university psychology 101 textbook, if it gets into high school psychology textbooks, I remain guardedly optimistic that it will have an impact, that education will have an impact, and it will diminish religiosity, at least the worst parasite forms.
If I could just say something there, I completely agree. And I think the best thing we can do is to get as much basic science into schools as soon as possible, and especially the science that goes into, what is a human being? What is human nature? I think it's interesting to notice that, many people will tell you that, okay, there are many scientists out there who are religious. And it's true. But if you look at it, and this has been done in several studies, it seems that, the more religious types are the mathematicians, the theoretical physicists. The biologists are way, way, way below everyone else in religiosity. And I think it's because the more you know about, our biology, the more you know about the living world, the more it becomes clear that, yes, everything that we feel and that we think can come out of this wonderful biology. It doesn't have to come from somewhere else. And I think that, we should basically start little kids in school on, genomics and work from there. We are all based on this interesting digital biological information that we share with, earthworms and manatees and everyone else out there. And to explain, human beings in the context of the living world from genomics, which is actually very easy to explain, I think that would help a bit. And then, as you say, go on to, of course, psychology should include, religious psychology and evolutionary psychology and where religion comes from.
I would add one thing to that. I would love to see human evolution being taught in elementary schools and high schools. I think that's an indirect entry into education, an education of children and adolescents that would have an enormous, it would have sort of like a vaccine effect on becoming religious. Because, again, I think human evolution is just so marvelously interesting. And to get across to people that every single one of the 7 billion people on the earth today comes from as little as somewhere between 600 and 2,000 individuals about 50,000 years ago. That, to me, that's extraordinary. And teaching human evolution, I think, is a vaccine against religion. I think it's a vaccine against some of the more virulent forms of racism. And it's just so interesting. All the explosion in knowledge since in the last 25 years. To me, every child in the United States ought to, have a chance to, when they visit Washington, D.C., to see the Human Origins exhibit that's now in the Natural History Museum. It's marvelous. The the one in the Natural History Museum in London. I mean, they're just marvelous, and I think engaging, and I think that's the way you can enter education without coming to sort of a direct assault on religion. You just pull the foundations out from underneath where it might grow.
But Andy, if I may just pick up on that point, it seems, and I'm not dismissing it for this reason, it's such a simplistic thing, and I think you're right. But you're going to have to overcome an enormous cultural barrier in order to do that, aren't you? And isn't that the problem?
Oh, certainly. All you have to do to sober up is watch the Republican debates. Certainly. But I mean, you say that, but I mean, a classic example was given by Rick Perry only a few weeks ago when he said, "What's the point of teaching children calculus at school when they're going to end up, at Walmart's at the cash register plugging numbers in?" I mean, if you've got a potential president who's got this attitude towards education, I'm sorry, am I wrong for being pessimistic? If he gets elected, you're absolutely correct for being pessimistic. But certainly it's worrisome. But I'm hopeful that Perry's bigotry and biases will ultimately keep him from getting the nomination. But but even your cash register person at Walmart could still understand the basics of human evolution and could still understand the basics of the psychology of religion.
Dr. Frank,
if I could just say something here.
Yeah,
I think a way of engaging people in, the biology of human beings is getting into consumer genomics. And I think the Americans are probably the group that are engaging with this the most. And actually sitting there with your own genetic information and becoming sort of hooked on finding out what can I get out of this information, what does it tell about me, it brings you into and opens up this sort of window on biology and what biology is, and thereby you get into a lot of science. I think engaging in that way could also help a lot, because museums are great and reading books are great, but I find that when you get people to actually have their own information there in front of them and work with that's quite different. Mm-hmm. It does something.
Not all museums are wonderful. The Creationism Museum isn't, for example. But Dr. Frank, what I was hoping to get to with this is, obviously you come from a Scandinavian country where religion is really not an issue.
Right.
What is there anything that you can identify that is different between Scandinavian countries and America? You were talking earlier about the evolution of religion. What's the difference? Why is it that there is such a huge difference in religious beliefs between America and Scandinavia?
We are the group that stayed. The group from Scandinavia and England and other places that left and founded America were the religious nuts, basically. I think at least there is something in that it was founded by people who wanted sort of, also to have religious freedom to, the Puritans and others. And then there were sects coming out of different countries and going to America because they could have their own sect there. And I suppose, I don't know American history enough to say, oh, this is the explanation. But it's a very new country. It was founded on these principles, and it has drawn a lot of people for whom apparently religion is also a form of, being in a group. There's a group cohesion in it. What I get out of when I ask Americans, why do you guys go to church so much? And they have all these different denominations. It's incredible. What they tell me is, well, it's so great to be in a church because you can move from one end of the country to the other, and there is the Presbyterian church right there, and you can go and find, your group. So I'm not sure if it's really sort of. It also plays a social role, I suppose.
Andy, you're based in America. What are your observations on this point?
I agree with Dr. Frank. I think you have to look at, there certainly was difference in the populations that came to the United States or across the Atlantic. There's some evidence that there, for instance, was a much higher incidence of people with attention deficit disorder. And that there's interesting stuff on that. So, my crazy ancestors came to this country and had maybe, as Dr. Frank was saying, aspects that bias them towards religiosity. And we know some things about, I think it's the serotonin transporter, the variations in that make you more vulnerable to religiosity. So there is probably a greater vulnerability or need for it at some level, at a biologic level. I think it's an interesting speculation.
Can I just make sure I understand what you're saying? So the Pilgrim Fathers, those on the Mayflower, had a propensity to a certain serotonin issue or something. I don't know the technical terms for it. And everything that's happened is a result of that.
No, not everything that happens, but and I think Dr. Frank will probably know this a little bit better than I. But there's variation for instance, the gene for the serotonin transporter, and there's some suggestion that those variations, even in that gene, influence religiosity. So,
Dr. Frank, please help us out.
Well, it's interesting. I have right here, in fact, a paper written in 2008, and the title is "Do Genetic Factors Influence Religious Life?" And the short answer is yes. We know that there is a lot of genetics involved in various aspects of being religious and how you practice religion and so on. And that's been found out with a lot of twin studies, of course. So yes, genetic factors are heavily involved in your propensity to become religious and maybe also to become a more, fundamentalist religious person or of strong belief or not.
I'm curious about...
We don't know sort of enough to say, okay, there's one gene that really does it. But the serotonin transporter gene that Dr. Thomson was just talking about is involved in a lot of our personality traits. For example, in my book, I find out that I have a double dose. I'm homozygous for what is usually called the sensitive or bad variant of the serotonin transporter. So maybe I ought to have been religious. But it's just to say that there are several genes, maybe hundreds of genes involved. We just know that, yes, there is a genetic basis for your propensity to become religious. And you can certainly imagine that, groups of people who leave countries, who emigrate, they have certain, personality traits that are, they're more perhaps adventurous, industrious. They probably, as Dr. Thompson said, more hyperactive. Go on.
No, people talk about the dopamine allele that's most associated with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is found in the native populations of South America, the tip of South America, the populations that went the furthest from Africa.
Right.
People refer to it as the "don't tread on me" genes.
Yeah, DRD4, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that there's probably some genetic vulnerability to religiosity, but I don't think that means we're in the United States condemned to be this isolated population of fundamentalists as the world.
No.
Or at least I hope not, as the rest of the world achieves some sanity on the issue.
Well, I don't want to keep on going back to it, but it does seem to me that, as I say, it seems to be such a strong trait of human nature to create a God. I mean, I'm not aware, with one exception, I'm not aware of any civilization or culture that has ever developed in the world that has not created some form of belief system, normally involving some sort of deity. We can't evolve out of that quickly, can we?
Well, no, I think your reasons for pessimism are solid. I think there's some things that indicate a reason for some cautious optimism, and we have the challenges before us. But Europe has been able to achieve a degree of secularism even before this explosion in knowledge. And you all achieved it without some of the knowledge now available to us. And that's one of the things that gives me a little bit of hope.
I agree. And I realize that the time just whizzes by so quickly. Dr. Frank.
Right.
Is your genome beautiful?
I would say that every genome is beautiful.
That's avoided the answer.
If you look at the DNA molecule, it is wondrous and it is beautiful. But, my genome, the title is pretty ironic because the more I look at it, the more I look into it, there are serious flaws there. So, it's beautiful in moderation.
The ability to look at the genome and to recognize certain traits, as we mentioned before, could potentially lead to bad things. You obviously strongly advocate in your book the idea that we should all have a look at our genome. What do you see? I've mentioned the bad points, but what do you see are the benefits?
Well, there are tons of benefits. First of all, I wouldn't say I'm not advocating everyone who doesn't have an interest in looking at their disease risks and whatnot to go out there and become worried. If they're very worried about information about disease risk, don't do it. But what I'm saying is this is a development that's not going to go away. It's not something that we can, choose to participate in or not. 20, 50 years from now, genetic information will be as ubiquitous as, IT is now. It will be in everything. It will certainly be in everything that has to do with health. And it will bring, better health care. It will bring more personalized healthcare. There's no doubt about it. It might be slower than some of the prophets have gone out there saying that, it would be within 5 years we can cure this and that and we can have, personalized medicine all over the place. Probably not. But it is a development that is, it's sort of, it's going in that direction. And if you talk about sort of more, you could call it, soft advantages, not in the healthcare system, but advantages in just how we look at each other and ourselves. I think that, again, the more we know about this basic biology, the more we realize that we are just, part of this whole living world. The more you look at genetic information, the more clear it becomes that every one of us is just, sort of a temporary vessel for this information that has been flowing for eons and will flow for eons after us through different, organisms like ourselves. I think it's a very healthy way of looking at the phenomenon of life and our
do you think that many people may sort of like hear what you've just said and think that it sounds somewhat clinical and cold and lacks mystery and whatever.
But if they were listening, don't you think that it's kind of almost mysterious, sort of revelatory to think of yourself as, God, I'm just this.
Well, actually, I don't. What it seems to be, what you're saying is, you can have your DNA sequenced and you'll be able to know very specific things about you. So in that way, it is sort of like cold and harsh.
But then you're misunderstanding completely.
Okay.
What I'm also saying in this book, and you haven't read that far, I guess.
I'm very sorry, I haven't.
Yeah. But what I'm also saying, and that is a very, very important point in genomics, is that the genome is not a straitjacket. It is a nice, soft sweater. And you can sort of, shape and form it. What we're learning from genetics is, of course, that our genes, it's an information that's, the same in all our cells, but it is constantly being interpreted and reinterpreted in our cells, and the genome is constantly interacting with our environment, with everything we do, with, the more books you read, the more your brain changes, and so on and so forth. So there is nothing in human nature that is not genetic in a way. But there's nothing that's only genetic. It's genetic and environmental. So nature or nurture is dead. That discussion is dead. It's all nature and nurture. And the more we're learning about how those two interact, the more we can, say, okay, I have these biological cards. I was dealt a certain genome. but I can do this, that, and the other, and I can modify the way this genome is interpreted, and thus, affect how my life turns out.
Andy, would you have your genome tested, and do you think that most people, or do you think a lot of people, approaching it from a psychological or psychiatric sort of angle, do you think most people, or some people, would be averse to having it tested on the basis that they may not actually want to know? It's kind of like, knowing what the future holds, and a lot of people may not want to know that. What do you think?
Well, I would agree with Dr. Frank. We already have a lot of it already. Women checking to see if they have the genes for breast cancer risk, the genes for ovarian cancer risk. As she says, it's already upon us. It's not a matter. It's just a matter of how much more widespread it gets and how much cheaper it gets. In my business, I don't think there's going to be any question, but certainly within our lifetimes, we will all be carrying credit card-like structures in our wallet that have our pharmacogenetics on it, the genes relevant to our responses to various drugs. And in my business, we already know certain variations of genes that influence response to some of the drugs we give. So it's upon us, and I think, people confronted with the risk of a serious illness or even a potentially fatal illness are not going to have any problem having their relevant genes sequenced.
If I could just add something there, again, I would like to reiterate that it's not that you can see your future in your genome. You can't see what's going to happen. You can see things that might happen, but then it's like better vision, basically. You can see stones ahead on the road, so you can avoid those stones because they're there.
Well, I found the conversation absolutely fascinating, and I'm sorry that I brought you in somewhat later. I know the time, and I do need to move on, but can I thank you both very much? And just for those who are watching, again, Andy Thompson's book, Why We Believe in God or Gods, available from richarddawkins.net. Dr. Lone Frank's book, My Beautiful Genome, available from all good bookstores and also Amazon. I recommend them both. Although, as Dr. Frank rightly points out, I haven't read all of her book, and I apologise for that. But can I thank you both very much indeed, and can I invite, please, those watching to give a thumbs up to both Andy Thompson, and I know that you've got a very busy day today, so thank you for making time for us. Dr. Frank, it's always a pleasure to have you, and hopefully
to be with you.
We shall catch up soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for your support of Doctors Without Borders, and it's nice to talk to my old friend, Dr. Frank, again.
Yes, and you too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.